With the news yesterday of the death of Ned Sherrin, the presenter of Loose Ends, BBC Radio 4 lost one of its best-known and longest-serving voices. Here now, with a personal tribute to Ned Sherrin, is his longtime friend and colleague, the playwright and satirist, Alistair Beaton.
Way back in the 1960s, Ned Sherrin transformed British broadcasting, and he did so in one swift, bold stroke. By devising and producing That Was the Week That Was, he shook up television, irritated the government, infuriated the church, and delighted millions of people with a weekly serving of satire so entertainingly and accurately malicious that it defined all satire for decades to come. Later, Ned went on to be equally successful as a writer and a theatre director, but it's probably as a broadcaster that most Radio 4 listeners will remember him, above all as the voice of
Loose Ends,
which for many years famously came from
Studio B13 in Broadcasting House.
And what a voice that was. It was the voice of a man who revelled in the precision of language, a man who relished words and knew how to use them. It was also the voice of a bon vivant, those remarkable vocal cords kept in working order by regular supplies of good food and fine wines. I first met Ned in 1979 when I was a guest on one of his programmes on Radio 2. He and I went on to write several theatre shows together, some successful, some not. But my God, we had fun. His sybaritic tendencies remained with him to the end. Not long before he died, when he was already quite weak, I went to see him and had hardly got through the door before he pointed towards the fridge and said, "Champagne, large one for you, small one for me." I did as asked. He stared at his glass bleakly and said, "Not that small." Loose Ends itself was the brainchild of Ian Gardhouse, a producer of great charm and quiet brilliance. I recall that over lunch in a distressingly modest restaurant in 1985, Ned and I helped Ian flesh out the basic idea. Ian's simple but brilliant formula was to cast Ned as a grandiose and knowledgeable old fart, a cantankerous uncle, surrounded by brash young talent. My own contribution was more modest. For the first 2 years of the programme, I wrote Ned's opening monologue, reflecting the events of the previous 7 days. It was a small part of the mix that was to make Loose Ends much more than a mere magazine programme.
Well, it all sounds very exciting,
as Ned would say, and did say, with just a smidgen of irony. But only a smidgen, because Loose Ends brought us the real Ned, the Ned of endless enthusiasm and boundless brio, the Ned full of curiosity about the world, the Ned whose extraordinary knowledge of high culture embraced a genuine enthusiasm for popular culture. Ned saw no contradiction in being as interested in Ken Dodd as in Samuel Beckett, and the list of Loose Ends guests always reflected this eclectic enthusiasm.
Mr. Eric Sykes, Sir John Mortimer, Sir Peter O'Sullivan, Sir Jimmy Young, Marvin Hamlish, Clive James, Tony Bennett, Timothy West, Stephen Frears, Diana Quick, Dame Eileen Atkins, Dame Judi Dench, Dame Helen Mirren, Dame Joan Perrott, Dame Maggie Smith, Jason Donovan, Joan Collins, Joe Brand, Ian McKellen, Diana Rigg, Mr. Ronnie Corbett, Roger Moore, Sheila Hancock, Sir Peter Hall, Tom Courtenay, David Threlfall, Robert Downey Jr., Sir Anthony Sher.
Well, they may all have been rich, famous and horrendously successful, but Ned always met them on equal terms. Mainly because he knew so much, but also because he always did his homework. Here he is making sure that Ian McKellen tells the right anecdote, but only after he's refreshed the memory of Joan Collins about a novel she believes she has written.
There's a reference in the cuttings to a young Tarki showering you with gifts in 1957.
Yes.
I see there's a reference to him on page 254 in the novel.
Is there? Oh.
I was fascinated to read in the oldie magazine this week, Beryl Bainbridge.
Am I in the oldie magazine?
Yes, you've got a very good review.
Oh, that's all right.
No, but did you realise that you are performing roughly on the turf where they brought 300 years ago Samuel Johnson's body to William Hunter's School of Anatomy to be dissected?
I am well aware of that.
There you are dissecting a marriage.
And it's a curiosity, yes, the dead body of Dr. Johnson was brought presumably to where my dressing room is, because I think I still get the whiff.
If Ned wanted to hear a particular story, he made sure the guest delivered. Here's an outside broadcast from Scarborough in 2004, where Ned very neatly extracted some self-deprecation from Alan Ayckbourn.
You got a less friendly reception once when you were proselytising for the theatre in Whitby.
Oh, Whitby is another nation up there. we tried to spread north, foolishly, and we played at the Spa Theatre in midwinter, where if you opened the dock doors, the set blew away. And I was so worried we didn't get anybody. We got sort of 2 people there week after week, and I got very depressed, and I went to give a talk, hoping to generate some enthusiasm. And I asked the question rather stupidly. I was very young at the time. I said, why aren't you coming to the theatre here? And they said, well, I'll tell you, said a bloke from the front row. He said, we don't like Scarborough. We don't like your plays. And after your talk tonight, we don't like you.
Despite the original concept, Ned as Old Fart was never entirely convincing. Ned himself, though incredibly erudite, was simply too irreverent and too inquiring to be a genuine copper-bottomed old fart, as we're going to find out in the course of this programme.
But first,
as an example of the mix that Ned so much enjoyed, the posse of young people and new talent drafted in to give Loose Ends its gloriously edgy quality. Edgy, did I say edgy? I think I meant anarchic.
Emma Freud.
Ned, you know how to whistle, don't you?
John Walters.
Sorry, Ned.
Carol Thatcher.
Yes, Ned.
Stephen Fry.
Oh, good heavens.
Victoria Mather.
As everybody knows.
Mark Stein.
Well, Ned.
Victor Lewis Smith.
That aside.
Arthur Smith.
But that's another story.
Jonathan Ross.
Ned, of course I do, Ned.
Craig Charles.
I was there.
Brian Sewell and Robert Elms.
I don't know about that.
Emma Freud has poured cold water over his head. We don't want one of those Pamela Stevenson incidents here, Richard.
The purpose of the posse was to provoke, and at times they could get very silly. In December 1987, Loose Ends played host to John Walters, who cruelly chose to look back on various pompous predictions made in the course of that year. A good time was had by all.
Now, what do you make of this? This is from November last year. It said, Madonna will divorce Sean Penn. Wrong! But here's another one. Terry Wogan is going to take charge of a new and serious TV programme. Wrong! Selena Scott is going to amaze us all on television. Wrong! Like, let's get serious. Come on, politics. There will be a general election in 1987. Mrs. Thatcher will choose October the 22nd. Wrong! The SDB liberalises excellent prospect. Wrong! Duchess of York pregnant in April. Wrong! Fergie will emerge as a trendsetter in the fashion world. Wrong!
Ned actually welcomed interruptions from the anarchic wits around the table. Have a listen now to fat lady chef Clarissa Dixon Wright as she waxes enthusiastic about woodcock, not necessarily a wise thing to do in the presence of Arthur Smith.
Why do you cook woodcock with the innards left in?
Because when snipe and woodcock fly away, they shit as they take off. I didn't think that I needed to pull my punches on the word there. And so they evacuate their bowels.
Well, it's not surprising with people shooting at them.
That, incidentally, was also the interview where we learned from Clarissa Dixon Wright that Tony Blair's nickname in Chambers was...
Miranda.
Yes, that's right.
Miranda.
I believe it's a reference to The Tempest. I say no more. Ned's great love of the theatre coloured almost every edition of Loose Ends. It's easy to make fun of this lovey stuff, but Ned's knowledge of theatre was utterly encyclopedic. Earlier this year I mentioned to him that I was doing a new translation of a play by Max Frisch, and without a moment's hesitation Ned reeled off the cast of the first British production at the Royal Court in 1961. Scary. He was always at ease with actors, managing somehow to venerate and provoke at the same time. In March 2003, he had the most enormous fun interviewing Timothy West, who, for the third time in his career, was playing King Lear.
We're back on the age thing, Timothy. You did it when you were, 37 in 1971. You did it 12 years ago when you were in mid-40s, I suppose, and now here you are, mid-60s now?
Yes.
I had the most extraordinary letter through the post yesterday morning about you. It says, if he is not a theatrical personality whose name is on everyone's lips, this can only be on account of his innate modesty and his willingness, possibly his preference to being an integral part of a production rather than a majestic eminence superimposed on it. But just the sight of his name on a theatre programme quickens the pulse with the expectation, never unrealised in my experience, of a performance of depth and sensitivity created from a lifetime of a consistently applied professionalism. It will be easy for you to fill the interview many times over with his marvellously humorous anecdotes, but I hope you will steer it for some time at least into more serious waters. For example, Do please ask him where he got the idea from of running his fingers through Cordelia's hair for long periods near the end of King Lear. It was overwhelmingly moving. Timothy West is the only Lear who made me feel at the end of the play that his understanding of love had miraculously grown to such an extent that it outstripped Romeo's and Tristan's and rivaled St. Paul's.
Yes, that's my agent. He does right.
More inventive Irish lyric writing later.
Ned there not giving a damn about ethnic sensibilities, which he always found rather risible. Politically correct, he was not. In fact, had I been a more sensitive Scot than I am, I'd have been insulted almost every time I met him. "Hello, Alistair," he would say, in what he fondly imagined was an authentic Scottish accent. "Hello, how are you today?" I think the word is incorrigible. I'm not convinced Richard Jobson was all that amused, nor Neil Kinnock, nor the entire population of the Netherlands.
Now, time, Richard. I think it's time for another report, isn't it?
I think it's getting there at the moment, Ned. 11:33.
11th. Can you hold it until 12?
Well, I will.
In his epoch-making election broadcast, he asked, why was he the first Kinnock? Oh, it's good going to my Richard Jobson impersonation. Why was he the first Kinnock in 1,000 generations to have attended university?
Whatever you feel at the moment, say yes to it. Even if you're thinking a huge no, accept it. When you say yes to a no, the no becomes smaller till it is a yes.
I promise you, Ned thought that was a Dutch accent. During a loose ends excursion to the Edinburgh Festival in 1996, Ned found himself upbraided in front of a cheerfully indignant audience as Arthur Smith and American comedian Thea Vidal rallied to the Scottish cause.
What about English audiences compared to American ones? Do you find a huge difference, or are they just the same the world over?
No, Scottish audiences.
Scottish. Did I say English?
Yes, you did.
Well, British, Scottish, Welsh, Irish.
See, you made them all mad now. They liked me a minute ago. Now they mad because you called them English. Then you're not English, you Scottish, and you hold your head up.
Needless to say, you didn't have to be Scottish to be thrown to the wolves on Ned's loose ends. Here he is introducing American comic Jackie Mason.
Jackie, two of your great comedic colleagues, Bob Hope and Alan King, have left us recently. They say things go in threes. How are you feeling?
I don't know why I should be the third one. I never claimed that I'm a comedian.
Lots of your audiences would claim that.
This is your claim. I just show up.
You come from an enormously long line, generations of rabbis. You have 3 rabbi brothers, I think. How do they feel about the act?
They were nauseous when I started it because they thought I was digressing from the whole heritage of being a rabbi. Then I started to make a fortune of money. Then they said, well, it's not that bad. Then they say, he could always become religious some other time. Meanwhile, let him keep working, we could use the money.
How often do they come and see the act?
Whenever they need the money.
One of Ned's great passions was cricket. His concern for the health of the sport he loved was revealed when he interviewed Nasser Hussain, who'd recently retired as England cricket captain, and was on loose ends to talk about his autobiography. This was in 2004, soon after the Zimbabwe affair, when many English cricketers agonised over the rights and the wrongs of playing in Mugabe's tortured nation.
Let's come to the Zimbabwe affair now. The ICC's Australian Chief Executive, Malcolm Speed, walked into a meeting. A lot of you were having really serious heart-searching about playing the game in Zimbabwe, either for moral worries or security worries. And he came in and said, I've got 30 minutes, and kept looking at his watch. Let's just hear what he said. I was wondering whether you were being a bit oversensitive until I heard him on the Today programme a couple of weeks ago, and Steve May asked him this question.
Nasser Hussain, in his new autobiography, accuses you of treating the England players dismissively. How do you react to that?
Nasser seems to be terribly unhappy about a lot of things that have happened in his cricket career, so I don't intend to read it. I don't generally read cricket books.
I don't generally read cricket books was his last phrase. He does sound a pig.
Well, I mean, that's how he came across.
See, I've been trying to tell you. Just trying to tell you.
Music was a regular part of loose ends, though Ned rarely had anything to do with the choice of performers. The truth is that despite his long chairmanship of Counterpoint on Radio 4, where week in, week out he cheerfully mispronounced the names of the great composers, Ned's taste in music was more Frank Lesser than Joss Stone. But on Loose Ends, he hugely enjoyed presiding over the young music scene.
I'm just trying to tell you, super, duper, wait a minute.
Joss Stone was super duper and a splendid midriff. Do credit.
Loose Ends often had a cheerful vulgarity about it, and there were moments when Ned clearly approved of the choice of music. Here I use the term music in the loosest sense, as on the day when Julian Clary offered listeners what Ned optimistically described as
a tune of unremitting good taste.
We set sail on Tuesday, the sun was baking hot. The captain said, hold on to this, so I said, why not? As I gripped it tightly, my hand began to sweat. I asked if I could let go now, he mumbled, no, not yet. I can, in the salty sea. I miss a nice cup of tea, or something hot inside me. Boy, oh boy, fish and chips perhaps, or a juicy saveloy. He asked if he could go below, oh please let me do. I said that he could please himself, but he'd have to join the queue. Then he dropped his trousers and gave a funny wink. I didn't know where to put myself till he said, where'd you think? In the salty sea's a lovely sight. I do miss a nice cup of tea though, something hot inside me. Boy oh boy, fish and chips perhaps, or a juicy saveloy. Fish and chips perhaps, or a juicy saveloy. Ahoy!
Well, I'm sure he's good to his mother.
Loose Ends has never been big on politics, but when politicians did come on, Ned sometimes managed to winkle out some odd little bits of information. Here he is in 2004 talking with Robin Cook, who recalls one of his odder constitutional duties as Leader of the House, a post that Cook resigned from in protest over the Iraq War.
What did you mean on 29th of October 02 when you told Dear Diary, famously, I failed to save the goat?
I'm very glad you reminded me of what I said on the 29th of October. I was sitting here scratching my brain, like, what happened that night? Well, the goat, goat is basically around Milton Keynes, left over from the days of the shoe industry, where they used a lot of goat leather. And to this day, we still have the Queen's speech inscribed on goat leather. She, of course, doesn't pay any attention to the vellum copy. She reads from a cardboard copy. But we still have to finish the Queen's speech text 10 days in advance, so it can be put on vellum before we actually have the Queen's speech. When this was explained to me, I said we could save a whole 10 days of preparation if we scrapped the goat. But I'm afraid I failed to carry the day with me, and I regret to say we are still slaughtering the goat so we can have vellum for the Queen's speech.
Sometimes political anecdotes came from unexpected sources. Here's Ned with Sir Peter Hall in 2005.
Back to Mozart for a bit, since we're exploring some of the turbulent moments in your career. What was the difference you had with Mrs. T, as the Baroness then was, over Amadeus?
She came, in the 15 years I ran the National Theatre, she came once when Robert Armstrong, the Secretary of the Cabinet, brought her to see Amadeus. There was a supper party afterwards, and I was put next to her, and she turned to me and said, Sir Peter, I think it's absolutely disgraceful that the National Theatre should put on a play in which Mozart says four-letter words. And I said, but he did, Prime Minister. And she said, nonsense. He couldn't have done. That beautiful, elegant music was quite out of the question. And I said, but he did. He loved dirty jokes, and he loved four-letter words. And she said, I don't think you heard what I was saying.
Apart from the occasional megastar who'd be swept off by PR minders seconds after appearing on the show, most guests would troop around to the George after the programme ended at 11 o'clock. This was when Loose Ends still went out live on a Saturday morning. In the George, a pleasant pub just around the corner from Broadcasting House, guests and regulars would be plied with drinks and dubious Scotch eggs, while Ned used the opportunity to garner more showbiz gossip. It was also, of course, an opportunity for people to score points and drop names.
Were any of you on the Rate and Moreno? No, because we had the classic name drop in the George afterwards. Little Tim Vine was suddenly there was
6'2", Ned.
There was a moment of sort of awkward silence there, and he suddenly, stars in his eyes, he'd looked at Rita Moreno and said, "Did you ever meet Elvis?" And she said, "I dated him, but only to make Marlon jealous." Now, that's about 10 words to get two of the best names in showbiz, right?
As a great lover and compiler of anecdotes, both theatrical and otherwise, Ned came up with a simple device designed to elicit the truth.
We do have a little regular item on Loose Ends called SAT, the Society for the Authentication of Tall Tales.
And he used it whenever he could. Here he is, cross-questioning Diana Rigg.
During your Avengers period, did your mother look after your fan mail, and if letters got too frisky, did she write back suggesting they tipped a bucket of cold water over themselves?
No, she didn't do that. No, she did answer my fan mail, but if the letters got too lurid, she'd write back and say, "You're far too young for my daughter, and I suggest you take a good run round the block."
Sometimes, of course, the tall tale was not authenticated. With Alec McCowan, Ned only managed to score 2 out of 3.
Is it true that when you did your St Mark's Gospel in New York and Emlyn Williams did one of his solo programmes, you had the same producer and he gave a joint cast party in between the 2 runs?
This is absolutely true, yes.
Did he also ask you when you were on tour with St Mark's, you had, I think, one stage manager, and he suggested to you one day, being a close with $1, that since you were in the first class and the other chap was in the sort of tourist class, it might be nice, since you got on so well, if you went back and sat with him in the tourist class?
That is absolutely right, and I suggest it would be nicer if he sat with me in the first class, which is how it worked out finally.
Finally, is it true, when you were in The Importance of Being Earnest at the Old Vic, that on the first night, from the stalls, the leading actress had to be prompted over the line, "a handbag"?
No, that is not true.
Although Ned could be brisk to the point of rudeness when he needed to push the programme along, he did have that knack possessed by all great presenters, which is knowing when to permit a degree of benign chaos.
Ned, knock.
Who's that?
I'm not the sort of man.
Not the sort of man who what?
No, you're not meant. You're not meant to put the what on the end there. Oh, dear.
I'm not the sort of man who?
I'm not the sort of man who would normally feel the need to resort to knock jokes. But this one I heard this week made me laugh. Right, here we go, Ned. Knock.
Who's that?
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson who?
You're on the jury. See, if you said Michael Jackson who what, Ned, that would have ruined the joke.
But I learned quickly, Arthur.
Yes, well done.
Loose Ends played host to many of the great names of comedy. Listening back to them now, you can't help realising just what a terrific sense of fun Ned had. There was a mischievous part of Ned that was never happier than when in the company of somebody who could make him laugh.
Now, let us turn to the Squire of Knotty Ash.
By you, what a beautiful neighbour, ramming a cucumber through the vicar's letterbox and saying, "Look out, the Martians are coming." This... Or even worse, what a beautiful day for putting your kilt on upside down, shouting, "How's this for a shuttlecock?" But you can't.
That was Ned with Ken Dodd in an outside broadcast from Liverpool's Everyman Theatre. With Doddy playing at home, it was the perfect venue for Ned to extract some of his favourite gags.
I wanted to see if you've been reported accurately in various interviews. I wonder if you can do the payoff. I've played the Shetlands twice.
But they couldn't believe it the first time.
That's right. Let's try another one. I can tell a joke in Newcastle and it gets a huge laugh. I tell it again in Newmarket, nothing.
Well, because you can't hear it. How's that?
At the 1996 Edinburgh Festival, the big comedy town of Loose Ends was Bill Bailey.
Bill, I understand that you've been concerning yourself with matters of space and time recently.
Yes, and by that, I think you mean Doctor Who. Now, as a child, I was terrified by this, particularly the music, and this is how I remember it.
And then we got Bill Bailey showing off his keyboard skills and his comedic skills by suggesting that the Doctor Who theme would sound better as Belgian jazz. It's a lovely example of how Ned was able and willing to take a back seat and nod and chuckle along as someone else became the star turn.
C'est lui. Dans la nuit, Docteur qui? il voyage dans le TARDIS. La boîte de téléphone fantastique d'espace. L'intérieur est beaucoup plus grand que l'extérieur. Et ça, c'est le mystère du docteur Key. L'ennemi, il s'appelle le maître. Avec la barbe noire et blanche comme le badger. Il veut contrôler le monde. Contrôler le monde, toujours, contrôler le monde. Il se lève le matin, il veut contrôler le monde. Après le petit déjeuner, il veut contrôler le monde. Il est complètement fou. Mais il ne contrôle le monde jamais. Parce que il n'est pas très réalistique. Avec les Daleks, le docteur est supérieur. Parce qu'il peut monter l'escalier.
During 1987, one of the young Loose Ends regulars was Jonathan Ross, who was an enormous fan of Frankie Howerd. Loose Ends brought the two of them together.
I have to tell listeners that this has been a meeting that Jonathan's been looking forward to a long time because he is Frankie's #1 fan.
You mean, well, that's the one I've got.
Jonathan, do your Frankie impersonation.
Oh, my flabbergasted. I've never been so flabbergasted.
That's very good. At least I recognise that. Most impressionists who do me do go, oh, that's the only thing you missed there.
Oh.
They lose things that tighten the trust bit.
It is.
Yeah, you've done very well.
I'm going to the gym, mate. I'll work on it.
You know he wants to record an album of Frankie Howerd songs.
Who does?
He
I
does.
was going to do Johnny Sings Frankie. But rather than go Sinatra
I didn't
way,
know.
I thought I'd do
I'm all for
Three
that.
Little Fishes.
Yeah, well, you didn't write the lyrics of those.
Even when you cannot get it up, Pompey. That's the line.
The first record I made, I know you're riveted with this, was Three Little Fishes, and it sold 36 copies. And the company went bankrupt.
Would you like to do a chorus of Three Little Fishes together?
Down. Wait a minute.
Oh, sorry.
After four. Down in the meadow in a little fishy pool lives 3 little fishes. And a mama fishy too. Swim, said the mama fishy. Swim if you can.
And they swam and they swam right down to the dam.
No, over the dam.
I got the new
Now,
bit.
this is the part. Whoa, didn't that what? Whoa, didn't that what? See, it's that bit.
Sometimes silly, sometimes serious, sometimes skittish, sometimes thoughtful, sometimes charming, occasionally waspish, sometimes camp, rarely superficial, always inquiring and entertaining and crackling with energy. That was the Loose Ends mix because that was the Ned Sherrin mix. He was simply an astounding assembly of talents and a decent and generous man to all his friends. I hope this programme's offered at least a flavour of all that. With more than 20 years' worth of material to plunder, I haven't found the choices exactly easy. Still, I'm glad Radio 4 asked me to present this programme. And I'm glad I knew Ned. We're all glad we knew Ned.
And that's all.
Yes, I'm afraid it is.
What a cornucopia. Goodbye from Loose Ends. Farewell. 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 Farewell.
Farewell, Ned. And thank you.
That personal tribute to Ned Sherrin, who died yesterday, was presented by the playwright and satirist Alistair Beaton. The producer was Peter Griffiths.